Rick called a radio station first before calling the police. So the word began to circulate informally throughout the nation by noon, and around 3 o'clock it came out that it was Kurt Cobain.
It's a complete tragedy. Nobody thought it would be like this. I mean, and who's to say how everybody thought it would be? I mean, everybody expected Nirvana to keep going, right? And be a band and stay productive in spite of all the psychodrama, blah, 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 blah. But he's just like everybody else.
All night long here in America, the MTV has been running special reports on Cobain and Nirvana videos. Courtney Love has disappeared at last report, taking, of course, their child with her.
Around the world, fans went into mourning. Chris Novoselic paid the band's respects in an outdoor service in Seattle.
On behalf of Dave, Pat, and I would like to thank you all for your concern at this time. We remember Kurt for what he was, caring, generous, and sweet. Let's keep the music with us. We'll always have it, forever. Kurt had an ethic toward his fans that was rooted in the punk rock way of thinking. No band is special, no player royalty. That's the level that Kurt spoke to us on, in our hearts. And that's where he and the music will always be.
He's such an asshole. What you ought to say, asshole, really loud.
Courtney read extracts from the suicide note.
Only because I love and feel for people too much, I guess. Thank you all from the pit of my burning, nauseous stomach for your letters and concern during the last years. I'm too much of an erratic, moody person, and I don't have the passion anymore. Peace, love, empathy, Kurt Cobain.
The J-Files. So why are so many of us so pissed off? It seems like a toss, grieving and weeping and oozing for a junkie god punker that we never actually met. So why are we wringing our hands and our mates and generally making a lot of noise for a skinny slacker with a bad haircut and a guitar that he played from more than half of the world away? Because Kurt was special. He wrote anthems in his sleep, he said hip things, he wore a frock, and he told the homophobes and sexists and racists to stick it. He married an ugly duckling and had a beautiful baby girl and showed us that a cool post-punk, post-nuclear, loving rock and roll existence was possible for creeps like us too. Maybe 25 years ago, when Kurt was barely born, you could just about understand pointless rock and roll suicide. There was nowhere else for Janice and Jimmy and Jim and Brian to go. No one took them seriously, so they took themselves way too seriously. Kurt was happy, or so he thought anyway. He had a big laugh at himself, and when he wrote things like, I hate myself and I want to die, we were pretty sure he was taking the piss. He was the hip high priest of Generation X, and we're a lot cleverer than our parents were. We know that things suck, but we live with them, or we write songs about them. It's just not modern logic. It's not the neo-kid thing to do, Kurt. We love you and we miss you, but we think what you did is piss poor.
Without Kurt, there could be no Nirvana. The band and Courtney went their own ways. Bass guitarist Chris Novoselic stuck with music and formed a band called Sweet 75. He continues to be politically active in areas like music censorship. Drummer Dave Grohl took a year off before realising music was still where his heart lay.
Did you play either Chris or Kurt your demos when you were recording stuff during Nirvana?
Sometimes, yeah. They were pretty supportive. The studio was in my basement, so I just sort of say, hey, look what I did in my basement today. And be like, oh, wow, that's cool.
The Foo Fighters, with Grohl out front, came to Australia early in '96 and blew everybody away on the Somersault tour.
Well, I don't know you with it. I don't know you with it. I'll stick around. I'll stick around. So if I'm on, keep bombing. I'll stick around. I'll stick around. So if I'm
You know, we all felt like we had lost something extremely important and special when we lost Nirvana. But it was the kind of thing where you look back on it and you think, those were some of the greatest times of my life, and that changed my life forever, and it was a time that I wouldn't trade anything in the world for. But it doesn't mean that I can never have that kind of great feeling again. I'm not about to give up, you know. Life's too short to just think you've had it once and never have it again, you know. I want it twice.
Triple J.
Nirvana there with All Apologies, and Negative Creep before that from the muddy banks of the Wishgar. You're on Triple J, right across the country, across the Zulu with you. You're on the J-Files, and we're talking Seattle.
To hear all the new sounds and moods from the artist formerly known as Prince.
You're on the J-Files, we're doing Seattle. I suppose the other band that you think of when you think, apart from Nirvana that is, when you think of grunge in Seattle, is Pearl Jam. Now, the founding members of Pearl Jam were Jeff Ament on bass, Stone Gossard on guitar, and Mike McCready also on guitar. They came together while working on the Temple of the Dog album, a tribute to the late Mother Love Bone singer Andrew Wood, when in October of 1990 they auditioned singer Eddie Vedder. Vedder was recommended to them by ex-Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer Jack Irons, and Pearl Jam were born. Although at this stage they were still called Mookie Baycock, after a New Jersey Jets basketball player, they were rechristened Pearl Jam after a hallucinogenic preserve made by Eddie's grandmother Pearl. Their first record was ambiguously titled 10, then came Versus, Vitality, and their latest is No Code. Here's a track from 10, Alive. Three there from Pearl Jam. And from the top we had Alive, then Rearview Mirror and Spin the Black Circle, finishing it off there. You're on the J-Files. We're doing the Seattle thing tonight. It's about 5 to 12. Still to come between now and 1 o'clock, Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. But the boys didn't have it all their own way in the Seattle days. This is 7 Year Bitch. Not.
Or maybe the praise goes to this record label, Sub Pop Records. By the time the Seattle music scene had sort of put itself on the map, Sub Pop kind of came in and had the attitude of, why not do something like Motown had done in Detroit? And they had this idea of just sort of packaging a look and a sound, and they had a photographer, this guy Charles Peterson, who's in the film. He took all the photos. They had a producer who was producing all the records, Jack Endino, who's also in the film. And they had this logo, and they sort of just, it was kind of the idea of, let's just have fun with this. Let's sell records, which seemed not, you're not really supposed to do that if you're part of alternative culture. And so Sub Pop kind of came in and did that, and that really set the stage for what happened later, which was just the fact that 3 or 4 bands, by their own talents, skyrocketed to the top. So if you have a couple of bands who all of a sudden are being noticed on a wide scale, the rest of the world wants to know what's going on in that city.
Tonight we're doing the Seattle thing. We opened up that set with 7 Year Bitch, a track called Not, and Alice in Chains there with Angry Chair. Now, the release of the single Wood from Alice in Chains' album Dirt rocketed the band into popularity after it was released on the soundtrack to the movie Singles. Facelift was their debut, and it showed them to be the masters of bottom heavy metal, with Lane Staley's tortured vocals and Jerry Cantrell's great guitar work. Staley's much publicised battle with heroin has more than once threatened to overpower the band. In 1994, the band released a double EP, Jar of Flies and Sap, which was a sideways step into a much lighter, jammier direction for the band. And last year they released Grind. Here's a track from Jar of Flies. This is I Stay Away. That's Tad there with Greasebox. Wipers gave us Return of the Rat, and Alice in Chains at the top with I Stay Away. You're on Triple J right across the country. Costa Zulia here with you. It's about 12:15. We're doing the J sessions tonight on grunge and the Seattle sound. Well, the Super Suckers relocated to Seattle from Tucson at the tail end of the 80s and provided Seattle with a bit of a fresh injection of crowd-pleasing rock and roll. After singles on the Sympathy for the Record Industry record, Lucky and Empty labels, the Super Suckers released a singles compilation CD for Empty before signing with Sub Pop for 1992's The Smoke of Hell. Well, last year they released the Sacrilegious Sounds of the Super Suckers, still on Sub Pop. That's the Super Suckers, Bad, Bad, Bad. Still to come on the J-Files, Soundgarden, and we'll get Alice in Chains, Lane Staley, Mike McCready and Barrett Martin together for a bit of a jam session as well. Here's Hole.
And the sky was made of anger.
Well, we could head up and stay with my grandparents. They live near an RSL.
Yeah, we could, but they hate me.
Yeah, they hate me too.
But if you vote for your favourite song, call 1-900-155-444 for just 60 cents a minute and vote now.
The hottest 100 on Triple J.
I don't want to stop now.
That's the Gits there, Second Skin and Hole at the top, Gabus, Violet. You're on Triple J. It's time to do Soundgarden on the J-Files with Seattle. Soundgarden were one of the first Seattle bands to be signed by a major label, fronted by Chris Cornell. They were originally compared to the likes of Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, but seem to have kept a sound all of their own. It's the amazing guitar work from Kim Tile that has kept Soundgarden's fans faithful from their debut long player, Louder Than Love, Bad Motorfingers, Super Unknown, and the latest, Down on the Upside. Here's Kim now talking with Richard Kingsmill.
I think it is somewhat important that, you know, we all live here. Two of us were born here, two of us were raised here. So, yeah, that's somewhat important. For instance, I was born here, but I wasn't raised here.
Where were you raised?
I was raised in Chicago. Ben was raised in Seattle, but he wasn't born here. He was born in Japan, and Chris was born and raised here. So I think Seattle is very much an important part of our identity, yes.
Can you elaborate in what way? Just because of the musical heritage that's been so important to Seattle over the last 15 years, or something deeper?
It could be that. It could be something else. And we're very proud to be part of the fraternity of the Seattle music scene and art scene. I think it was a very exciting time in the late 1980s, and eventually it all blew up in the early 90s. I think we had a certain degree of pride in being associated with that and helping establish Seattle, putting it on the map as far as being a nice cultural center in the U.S. as opposed to San Francisco or New Orleans or New York or L.A. But I think also having grown up in Chicago, I can see a difference in idea, in an attitude politically and socially from different regions in the U.S. And there is a sort of Seattle provincialism and there's sort of strange sort of, it's hard to put my finger on, but there's a difference in attitude and tempo of life.
But wouldn't you think that would characterize most of the cities in America?
No, I think Seattle is very different from Chicago, very different from Los Angeles and New York, and these cities are quite huge. Some of these cities are as big as countries or states when you talk about New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles. And they're very different. They have different dominant industries, which affects the kind of labor pool it draws from, the kind of culture that sprouts from that. And there is a homogenous American sort of culture that could be dependent on its TV, its rock bands, perhaps, its sports figures, its politics. But there's also very localized and regional identity, which you can identify with the climate or the topography of the region, or the chief economic product of that region.
Or the racial mix?
Yeah, there's some very homogeneous metropolitan areas in the U.S., as well as there are some very integrated communities as well.
Triple J.
From the 1987 Screaming Life EP at Soundgarden with Nothing to Say. Chris Cornell still had long hair and looking quite young in the photo on the front. Kickstand before that, and Jesus Christ Pose, of course, there. All from Soundgarden. You're on Triple J, the J-Files. We're doing the Seattle sound. Here's Doug Prey, the director from the movie Hype.
Everybody feels comfortable wanting to be the center of attention, but nobody likes the attention. If somebody tells you all of a sudden that you're living in the hippest place on the planet, you get really uncomfortable. You sort of feel like, well, no, I moved here because I just want to live here. And I think that there's this backlash that develops around scenes that either perceive themselves as hip or other people think are hip that actually gets really uncomfortable. I mean, it was one thing to have everybody say, hey, the Seattle scene this is it. This is where it's at right now. This is the next Liverpool. It's another thing to have had 3 or 4 bands dominating the charts and on MTV and everywhere you turn. But to have the fashion industry sort of appropriating, no matter what you think of it, what was a non-style of clothing, which was just a basic northern style of clothing. I mean, I have relatives in Wisconsin who've been grunge for 50 years. I mean, I really do. And it's like, that was the ultimate absurdity.
Homebake, mate. Yeah, the festival. Oh, Sydney Uni. Hello? Oh, hello? Hello?
artificial red, smoke, poison consumed. In the house of ill repair,
Another track there from the Hype soundtrack. It's the Posies with Throwaway. Mudhoney gave us Suck You Dry. In there as well was Mad Season with Artificial Red, featuring Lane Staley, Mike McCready and Barrett Martin. And The River Rise as well from the Hype soundtrack in there as well, with Mark Lanigan from the Screaming Trees in there. There's a bit of a party going on in the next studio. A bit of a party going on here in my brain as well. To take us out on the J-Files tonight, here's a track, again, from the Hype soundtrack. This is Gas Huffer and Hotcakes. See you later.
Vote for your favourite song of '96 in Triple J's Hottest 100.